last year, I did an exhibition with my best friend called Cara Walker. She's a visual artist. And what I did was basically did a series of poems. I also recorded the poems, I performed them, and then obviously that was an exhibition that also got turned into an article, and then like the idea is that then turns into, I don't know, a book and a performance. So it's like taking a small idea and seeing how many things can that be. So one poem for me, I always try to see what are the other possibilities with that. So always trying to interweave everything that I can. Hi KLAT, my name's Tia-Zakura and this is my Get to Know Me with KLAT. So the Poets Palace EP came about from me just turning up to an open mic one day. I was working in London at the time at the Young Vic, and yeah, I went up to this open mic and did my second performance ever. And Casey, who was the organizer of Poets Palace, at the time he was finding people that he wanted to be on the EP, so it was 5 poets. And they actually had first, second and third prize, and I didn't even win any of them. But Casey came up to me after, he was like, "You're gonna be on the EP." I was like, "What EP?" I didn't know what it was about. And then yeah, from there we kind of just stayed in touch. And then it was basically about creating a track that was spoken word with music, working with some amazing musicians and collaborators. And it's my first time I'd ever I've done some recording stuff in the past, but it was my first time I'd ever done poetry to music and did it professionally recorded. So yeah, I did that, and then worked with Gus, who was kind of my producer, and saw him regularly while I was living in London. And then when I moved back to Cardiff, it was really difficult because I had to travel up to London to go to the studio. So yeah, I was going back and forth until we finally kind of settled on a piece that I wanted to do, because I was a bit of a perfectionist as well. And yeah, came up with the track, and then we had the launch, and it was really, really good. Loads of people came along, and yeah, it's my first track on Spotify, so. Some of my biggest inspirations, definitely growing up, I was always my dad used to play me a lot of old school hip hop, and I was always drawn to the female voices, so Lauryn Hill, and also you know, in the Fugees and Erykah Badu and stuff like that. And yeah, I always found inspiration from them, Roxanne Shante as well. And then I think as I grew up, I started to find those mentors in my life. And I think for me, mentorship has been a massive part of my creative journey. So Ndidi John and Sita Thomas as well, they're 2 real inspirations for me, and they've helped me get opportunities and also just be there to be a soundboard for the challenges that you face in your career. And then I'd have to give a lot of the props to my dad as well. He's gave me the tools to build the empire that I'm trying to build. So yeah, he's always been the go-to for me. Yeah, so Cymru and I is a book of 9 essays collated by Inclusive Journalism Cymru. So it started off so I started doing journalism about 3 years ago, mostly on sports, culture, music, and I was on a project with East, and from there I met someone called Sharish, and basically he set up Inclusive Journalism Cymru, and there was a call out to do a story called Cymru and I, and it was basically about your connection with Wales. And I submitted my idea, which was the story, the non-fiction story of my dad and I climbing the Welsh 3 peaks, but that was also used as a metaphor to tell the story of the uphill battle for acceptance in Wales that we face as Black people. I think, you know, things like language and class and race has played a big part into our identity. So my dad doesn't even consider himself Welsh anymore. So it's was digging into all of that and unpicking it. So that was the story, and I submitted my idea, and you just had to send 300 words, just a quick synopsis. And then yeah, I got chose to do that, and it was my goal to be published by 18, so I managed to reach that goal just about. And yeah, it's a really, really amazing book with loads of different perspectives on Wales, some negative, some positive. So yeah, it was really good for me to be a part of that. I think being an interdisciplinary artist is really important for me. You know, I do poetry and theatre directing and performance and journalism, and I think what I love is that I'm able to kind of have them feed into each other. So I love, whenever I write theatre, I'll write like spoken word theatre. So it's like using my poetic kind of hobby to also complement my theatre directing. And I think like with journalism, for example, like last year, I did an exhibition with my best friend called Cara Walker. She's a visual artist. And what I did was basically did a series of poems. I also recorded the poems, I performed them, and then obviously that was an exhibition that also got turned into an article, and then like the idea is that then turns into, I don't know, a book and a performance. So it's like taking a small idea and seeing how many things can that be. So one poem for me, I always try to see what are the other possibilities with that. So always trying to interweave everything that I can. I think that you don't really know who you connect with until you leave your city. So that might sound like a bit controversial, but I think that people can get a bit content in your friends and family constantly kind of supporting you, which is amazing, coming to your events and stuff. But I think once you leave your city, that's when it's really telling, like, are you speaking to, do you have an audience? Because yeah, you might have the same people kind of coming to your events or coming to your performances, and then I think once you leave, it's that's where you really see who you're connecting with. I think that there definitely is kind of a scene for poetry in Wales. You know, we've got like poet laureates and stuff, and I think there's a big scene for page poetry. But in terms of spoken word performance and kind of what I like to do is like flowetry, I don't think there's much of a scene here, and if there is, it is like very few people. I think the quantity is small, but also like I think the quality is not there yet in terms of like there's no like workshops or open mics that is like trying to churn out like high quality performance. And obviously poetry is subjective, and I'm not saying I'm like, you know, the best ever, but I think that, you know, when you go to London, there's like an open mic night every single night, or at least like 2 or 3 even. There's workshops, there's feedback, and there's kind of a much more of a community of it. And I think that we need to start passing down like skills, so the poets that do exist, because there are some amazing ones, like holding space for the generations to learn and experiment with their poetry, and also not to always support but not always celebrate. I think it's important to support artists that are developing, but also give them that constructive criticism, because if we keep just saying like, that's amazing, that's amazing, that's amazing, we'll never kind of progress. And I found that I got quite comfortable thinking, oh well, like here in Cardiff, like I'm really good, and then going elsewhere, it's like, oh well, there's a different level of kind of the standard. Yeah, I think so. I think a big challenge for me was kind of not being surrounded by people who were like-minded. I think if you grow up in kind of a community that people are very different to you, and maybe you try to like emulate them and be around that kind of thing, you kind of suppress parts of yourself. So like, obviously my dad's a lyricist, so I used to like do rap when I was like little, and in my school at the time that was like not seen as like cool. So I was like, oh well, I don't want to do that type thing. And it was only until like I approached like adolescence where I kind of found my voice in spoken word poetry and was able to just be like confident in that. It was only like a few months ago that I actually posted my poetry for the first time, because there's still that like pressure, I think, is very real. And I think also like there was one time where, this is another thing with the scene, I think it's hard to say those kind of controversial or taboo things. So there was like a time where I was performing and I have a line in my poem which is like, think about the things that we're taught to admire, parade the title, member of the British Empire, and that's something we're supposed to aspire to acquire. I can't feel pride in colonizer, I can't respect the occupier. And when I said that, people like left. Like there was genuinely people in the audience who were like kissed their teeth, like left. And I was like, okay, like that didn't connect with you. You might felt offended by that. Maybe they had an MBE or whatever. And it was just my opinion and I was just expressing that. But that was telling to me because I could have taken that like, oh my gosh, like people are leaving midway through my poetry. But I actually was like, no, like I know I'm a disruptor and I think that some of the most amazing creatives are disrupt spaces. So I was like, that's fine, you know, if you want to close your ears to it, then be my guest. But yeah, that was a moment I realized, okay, this isn't necessarily for everyone, but it should be, I think. In recent times, I think we've seen more than ever that, what my dad likes to say, not all skin folk are kinfolk. And what I mean by that is like, just because someone looks like you aesthetically, or someone's black or whatever, same race as you, background, gender, doesn't mean that they represent you. So, I mean, yeah, you can look to our governments or whatever, and it's not always that they have your best interests at heart. And a mindset is so much more important, I think, sometimes than actual visibility. I think both play a role together. So for me, I think it's important to tell black stories because black people currently are still seen as a monolith, and we get kind of put into these boxes, and even a black story, like what constitutes as a black story? That's like a question for me. Is it if it's written by a black person? Is it if it's talking about a black issue? So being able to kind of like dissect these things and, you know, I don't speak for people, but I will say the things that maybe we haven't been able to say. And I come from, you know, my dad is exactly like that. So I definitely take it from him. And I also think in Wales, the diversity is getting better, but it's like, we're still not on that kind of level playing field yet, where you'll have like a sci-fi, a romance, a comedy by like a white person can do all of those things. But we are like, okay, well, you have to talk about this, you have to talk about that. And it's like, no, I want to fight so that our stories are being accurately represented. And I hope that just continues to kind of grow in Wales specifically. I think we're a bit behind with that. Okay, I think they would say, I like to think they'd say driven. I think also, they might say I'm a bit pessimistic, but I don't think that's true. I think I'm realistic, like, but I think my friends would say I sometimes might focus on the negatives. And then I think they probably say like, I think they say like I'm a change maker. Like, I'd like to think that they would say that, yeah. Okay, so I'll give a poetry, an academic, and a drama. So a play that I think everybody should read is 7 Methods of Killing Kylie Jenner by Jasmine Lee Jones. That play is like, Misty as well by Rinze Kenny. But I'd say 7 Methods is like, I think everyone should read that. It changed my perception of theatre. I also think that The Psychosis of Whiteness by Kinde Andrews, I read that recently, my last read, and definitely recommend. And then I'd say A Portable Paradise. I forgot who it was by, but A Portable Paradise is a poetry book, and yeah, really touching. So I would say give them a read for sure.